Welcome and thank you for joining us today for this webinar on EMAC and animal resources. My name is Angela Koppel. I'm the EMAC Program Director at the National Emergency Management Association, and I'm pleased to present Leon Shaifer, the EMAC Senior Advisor. Leon is retired from Mississippi State Emergency Management Agency, and there really is no one in the world who's more knowledgeable about EMAC than Leon. Leon has been around since the inception of EMAC. So I'm pleased to be able to present Leon, and Leon, I'm going to turn the webinar over to you.
Well, thank you, Angela, and welcome and good afternoon, everyone. First of all, I'd like to thank Ollie Davidson and Dick Green for bringing us together, so to speak, and giving MEMA an opportunity for us to develop this seminar, this webinar, to discuss ways how EMAC and the animal resource professionals can better partner together by gaining a better understanding how the EMAC system can be utilized by your discipline. So let's begin by looking at today's agenda for this webinar. First, we'll start with a brief look at the Emergency Management Assistance Compact, or EMAC, and a few of the legal provisions that will enable state and local resource providers to move their resources across jurisdictional boundaries. Then we'll look at the EMAC used for animal response in recent disaster events. And then we'll identify some federal and state lessons that have been learned through these animal response deployments. And finally, we'll discuss pre-event preparation actions that are recommended to enhance capabilities using the resource typing and EMAC-ready package methodologies that we'll be discussing through the seminar. First of all, let's define exactly what is EMAC. I'm sure there's some of you sitting there today that are wondering about what the compact is and what it is not. Essentially, EMAC is an interstate mutual aid agreement that has been acted into state law by all member states that allows the sharing of resources across state lines as long as there is, first of all, a state of emergency or a disaster declared by the governor of the affected member state. The EMAC law is composed of 13 articles, some of which, and we'll discuss these in just a moment, were designed to remove the legal barriers that typically prevent movement of publicly owned resources across jurisdictional boundaries. And they establishes the immunity, the liability protection, workers' compensation, and licensure, certification, and reciprocities. I want to point out also, before we go to the next portion of the webinar, that EMAC absolutely owns nothing. The EMAC member states are the owners of these resources. EMAC is only a system. It's a process that is designed to be used by member states to move their resources across state lines during times of disasters or emergencies. EMAC is law of the land. Through its 13 articles that comprise the agreement, EMAC provides workers' compensation, protection, tort liability, and immunity, and licensure reciprocity for those personnel who are being deployed through the system. For example, Article 8 stipulates that each party state shall provide for the payment of compensation and death benefits as if the injury or death were sustained within their own state. In other words, each state takes care of their own in terms of providing workers' compensation. Article 6 of the compact stipulates that officers or employees of a party state or a member state who is rendering aid shall be considered agents of the requesting state for purposes of tort liability and immunity purposes. Therefore, the state who is receiving assistance is ultimately responsible, or liable, if you will, for any tort claims because of the deployed personnel who are deployed from assisting states are considered under law to be agents of the requesting state. Pursuant to Article 5, whenever a person holds a license or a certificate or other permit, such person shall be deemed licensed, certified, or permitted to render aid involving such skill. Here again, in other words, EMAC law recognizes and honors those licenses that are issued by other states, thus allowing those professionals with these special requirements to practice their skill in any EMAC member state so long as they are deployed under a duly executed EMAC mission signed by the authorized representatives of each of the party states. The current membership of EMAC is 54 signatories. EMAC law defines a state to be the several states, all U.S. territories and possessions, and commonwealths, and the District of Columbia. Thus, when we use the word or the term member state, it will refer to all 54 signatories who have enacted the compact into law. And by the way, the 104th United States Congress ratified the compact into federal law, thus making it Public Law 104-321. Here you see some data that has been obtained from more recent events where animal-related resources were requested and utilized through the EMAC system. As you can see, the use of these assets really began back in the year 2004 when the onslaught of 4, I think, different hurricanes during the hurricane season struck Florida. And as you can look forward from 05 during Hurricanes Katrina and Rita, the numbers of assets were moved to help out in this particular situations in these areas has dramatically increased as well. What have these deployments taught us? What lessons have been learned, if any, from some of these recent disasters? Well, as a direct result of the hurricanes Katrina and others, Congress passed the Pets Evacuation and Transportation Standards Act back in 2006. With the passage of the Pets Act, it was anticipated, and I think it can be anticipated, that more and more resources of this particular type will be needed, resource capabilities developed and deployed in response to future events affecting animal health and well-being. Also, the states have learned some valuable lessons as well from the events that we just reviewed. They are considering and recognizing the need to reach out and engage all agencies who have emergency responsibilities in order to develop and sustain a more broader operational response network. And this includes more non-traditional assets that may be considered non-governmental organizations or private providers. In addition, the states further recognize that in order to accomplish this new network, this framework of involving all emergency response capabilities, an intrastate mutual aid agreement, if put in place, if developed and utilized, will better enable states to deploy those non-state traditional personnel as agents of the state and be in compliance with the EMAC law. And they will maintain the capability on a more regular use basis by having these capabilities developed and used within their own states. EMAC holds the principles that if we can develop a strong capability and a response network within each of our member states, then moving these services, these goods, these resource packages, if you will, on an interstate basis will be much more easily facilitated. States are also increasing their commitment to develop capacities among the response disciplines to increase this intrastate use. If states could only maximize the use of all of these available local, state, volunteer, and non-governmental organizational and private sector capabilities under state law and cloak them as agents of the state for response to intrastate events, then deploying these assets out of state would truly meet any national surge requirements that might pose themselves. Okay, let's shift our attention now to how the EMAC process works. The EMAC process is comprised of 5 distinct phases. The process involves states affected by the emergency or disaster, as well as those states who may be assisting them in some way. The process also begins before the emergency occurs. That makes sense, doesn't it? It's always easier to prepare when you have time to prepare, develop capabilities, to train, and do those kinds of things that will hone the response capabilities rather than trying to put something together, as we saw back in some of the recent more catastrophic events in the last 4 or 5 years, trying to develop something on the spot because we want to help out our neighbor. We want to respond in some way or another. We found that those delays sometimes put a negative impact on our efforts to help one another. So doing things before the fact certainly makes a lot more sense than waiting till after the fact. And the process ends when the assisting state has been reimbursed for all the support given to one of the requesting states. So let's now look at each of the phases separately for just a moment. The first phase, or the pre-event preparation phase, includes a number of actions, and there are just some of them that we list for you here to look at. Developing EMAC plans and procedures and possessional checklists. Those are requirements under other articles within the EMAC law. Taking EMAC training courses and being prepared to implement that training in a real-world deployment. NEMA and FEMA and the states, all working together, have developed specific training for all individuals. For example, the Understanding EMAC course offered at the Emergency Management Institute in Emmitsburg, Maryland, twice a year, is open to all disciplines from public, private, federal, local government, and volunteer sectors. The audience can be anyone who has a desire to know anything about the EMAC system. Also, EMAC encourages exercising once the training has been done, to exercise so that individuals can see a practical application of the training in an exercise environment. And developing mission-ready packages, which I will cover with you just a little bit more a few slides down the line. But mission-ready packaging, as you will see when we get there, really does offer some tangible benefits to speeding up that old enemy of ours in the emergency business, which is the clock time. What does it take to activate the system? The next phase of the five-phase process. Well, the law, again, is very specific. The EMAC law requires that in order for a member state to activate the EMAC system, the EMAC law requires that the governor of the affected state declare a state of emergency or a disaster, depending on the specific legislative language that they can exercise this right under. The state then can open an event on the EMAC operations system and can now begin to officially request assistance from other member states. Now let's look at the request and offer phase. That's the next phase of the EMAC process. Now, there are many who would argue that this is probably the most important element, the most important component of the entire process. And I don't think anyone can debate that. This is the pure core of mutual aid assistance, helping one another, helping a neighbor, and wanting to do that. The process of requesting depends really on several different pieces of the methodology that we're going to describe here. The requesting state, as you can see with the antenna radiating out, it looks like two arcs over the top of it there. That's the broadcast message going out to indicate those are the states that have been affected. Conducts a rapid needs assessment immediately following the onslaught of a disaster or an emergency in order to determine whatever resource shortfalls that they have. And they define those shortfalls in a mission description on Section 1 of the Request for Assistance form, or what we refer to as the Rec A. And you will hear us repeatedly refer to the Rec A often without utilizing or belaboring the long term. And they take this Section 1 of the Rec A and they transmit it to the assisting state. The assisting state, shown over on to the right of your screen, that looks like a lifesaver. Really, that's a life ring going out because they're the ones that's offering the support back. The assisting state determines the availability of the resource request by looking at the best resource provider within their jurisdiction and transmitting that offer and the estimated cost of that resource back to the requesting state. If the offer assistance meets operational considerations and conditions established by the affected state, and that offer is accepted by the requesting state, then they complete Section 3 of the Rec A and return it back. Thus, the mission is authorized and resources now can be legally deployed. And those assets, those equipment, personnel that comprise that that asset are now umbrellaed under the legal protection of EMAC and can leave their jurisdiction and perform the services as defined. Now, once that Rec A is executed by the authorized representatives of both party states, it constitutes, under the EMAC law and under most laws, a legally binding contract. The response phase is comprised of three different stages. We have, as you can see, the mobilization stage, where personnel and equipment are notified that they are going to be deployed. They mobilize. They receive mission briefings on specificities of the environment they're going to and what mission they're going to perform, services they're going to provide, and they get all their equipment and gear ready to go and prepare to deploy. Under the deployment stage, where personnel and equipment actually deploy. They actually travel to the affected state and perform the services or provide the assistance that is defined in that request for assistance form, Rec A. Under the demobilization stage, when the mission has been performed, personnel and equipment are redeployed back to their home state, and the mission is deemed completed. And finally, the last stage of the EMAC process is arguably the most important phase, as some would state, because it involves actually paying for services that have been rendered. Here you can see that the reimbursement process begins with the demobilization of those deployed personnel who have returned home. They gather their documentation and submit their mission-related expense voucher or documentation to the resource provider for payment. Now, at this point, let me define what a resource provider is. It's important to know that that resource provider can be any local or state government or agency or department or volunteer, private nonprofit organization who can legally be deployed as an agent of a particular state. Now, next, the resource provider pays deployed personnel and forwards a reimbursement package to the assisting state for payment. The assisting state audits the reimbursement package, pays the claim, and prepares and sends the reimbursement package on to the requesting state. The requesting state reviews and audits the documentation, and if all is in order, reimburses the assisting state for all eligible costs inconsistent with EMAC law. Now, this provides you with a very simple snapshot of the EMAC process. Now, let's flip back to the pre-event preparation phase, if you will, and let's take a little bit closer look at some of the specific actions that we recommend and are recommending to the national response community that should be taken during this particular phase that will help them as responders better prepare to deploy through the EMAC system. Typing resources using the National Incident Management System, or NIMS, established definitions. Develop mission-ready packaging using the NEMA methodology. And we will show you that in just a moment. Becoming familiar with first responder registries and how to use them and how to use them to identify qualified personnel, and to resolve licensure and certification issues, and even enable legislation if it's required in order to facilitate that cross-border recognition where standards and certification or licensure requirements may vary from state to state, and we have found that they do in many cases. Also, to establish working relations with state EMAC coordinators and authorized representatives of your states, and network with professional peers in other states, and do this before the next big event occurs. Organize resources under state sponsorship. Develop teams, if you will, through intra-state agreements, and to function and work and develop these packages when there's time to do it, and making sure that whether the composition of a team is publicly owned or privately owned or from volunteer agencies, that they all can be cloaked as agents of the particular state that they're developing this capability under. It's also important to know that EMAC is a state-to-state compact, but it can be utilized to benefit its local political subdivisions and those who have are performing a quasi-governmental function under contract with a state, county, or city government. To ensure that the legal processes required are in place to deploy these agents, these resources as agents of the state, to be in compliance with Article 6 of the Compact. State agency has a tremendous bearing on whether or not an individual is going to be covered under the umbrella protection or going to be civilly or criminally held liable because they're outside of their jurisdiction unofficially, such as self-deployment or self-dispatching puts people in harm's way in terms of legal jeopardy and legal reciprocity. Some other pre-event preparedness actions. Typing and credentialing resources using the NIMS standards. Establishing mission-ready package resources, complete with the estimated cost that is so important at the time offers and requests for offers are being made, doing an attempt to help an affected state. Building capacity so that rapid deployment is almost foremost in making sure that these particular packages can be operated self-sufficient in the field in a disaster environment so that they won't impact, in many cases we found in recent events, they won't impact on the fragile logistics system of an affected member state. Now let's look at what mission-ready packages are. They're response-specific and recovery capabilities, organized, developed, trained, and exercised prior to an emergency or disaster. They are based on what we think is the next logical step after the NIMS resource typing has been completed. These packages must be developed, however, in cooperation with resource providers, and you remember who resource providers are from the definition we had just a few slides back, and be certain that they are coordinated with the State Emergency Management Agency for the very simple reason that being EMAC is a state-to-state agreement, then if a resource is to be deployed through EMAC, it must be accomplished by the authorized representatives of the requesting and assisting states. And the only way the member states will know that a capability is being developed and exists at the sub-state level is through networking together and having that asset recognized and put into the appropriate database so that it can be called upon and called up either on an intrastate or an interstate request. Now, as I said a second ago, the mission-ready packages, or MRPs, are based on the NIMS resource typing scheme. We think it's the next step beyond that. What is the definition of resource typing according to the NIMS Resource Center? Well, their resource typing is categorizing, and this is a quote, of course you can read it yourself and see, by the capability, the resources requested, deployed, and used in incidents, measurable standards identifying resource capabilities and performance levels serve as the basis for the categories. Resource users at all levels use these standards to identify and inventory resources. NIMS established 10 different working groups back shortly after the Homeland Presidential Directive establishing this requirement started. And as you can see, they're listed here on the shot we're showing you of the Tier 1 resources on the NIMS website. There are 10 of them. And they were available, they comprised, each of the working groups were comprised of experts that were selected from each of these disciplines to help develop the typing schemes that have been posted there. Animal health emergencies was completed some time ago, and I think most all of you that have visited the website and looked at some of these definitions would agree that it's a continuing work in progress, and I know that the NIMS is continually functioning in this regard with these working groups. They're meeting and updating and expanding these definitions on a continuing basis. This is an example of what you will see when you visit the NIMS site to view the type resource definitions, especially for animal health resources, which was the first one listed there a moment ago. These are the job titles that are associated with the NIMS Animal Health Emergency Typing Initiative. And here you can see an example provided of the typing scheme and the mission capabilities for, in this instance, a large animal rescue strike team. And if you look closely at the template, you will see that there's each of the resource has a name, it has a category, it has a kind, whether it's an individual or team. In this case, it is a team. It has minimum capabilities under the components and the metrics that are designed for that particular kind, and it's also typed 1 through 4. Here you'll see the relationship between the NIMS typing definition and the EMAC Mission Ready Package template. And in the foreground, you will see the NIMS definition. In the background, you will see a portion of the Mission Ready Package template with an exploded area here showing you the relationship between those two documents and how the data that is provided in 5 different areas on the established NIMS typing definition is also used on the EMAC Mission Ready Package template, so that the two are very compatible and use the same information in general that shows up on one is also used on the template of the other. Now, you can obtain the EMAC Mission Ready Package methodology that we're talking about now by viewing the emacweb.org website. And this is the view you will get when you enter that on your browser. You simply, once you're there, simply select the Mission Ready Package tab, as shown here, and the Mission Ready Package is linked to the drop-down box. Oh, by the way, there's also a webinar presentation available on this page that will explain to you in more detail than I'm able to do today how the MRP process really works. Although that program was done last July, it is still viewed quite often, and I suggest that you view that if you are interested in developing mission-ready packages using this template. Now, also from the Mission Ready Packages link, you're able to view 114 plus models of packages that have been created as examples to use. Now, the data on these models can easily be cut and pasted onto the Mission Ready Package cost estimation template shown here in red outlined in the box. And it's available for downloading onto your desktop for your personal use. And I would recommend that if you're interested and want to use this template, or to massage it at your leisure and see how it works for you, or if it will work for you, download it when the webinar is over with to your desktop and utilize it. Do not attempt to fill it out on the web and expect you can save it. It doesn't work that way at all. You have to download it, and then you can add data into it, and it will contain the data that you enter. The beauty of the Mission Ready Package template that NEMA has designed is it's created in an Excel format. The template contains 20 separate fields in which to put input data. And as an added feature, cost estimation forms are integrated into the workbook. So this feature provides separate tabs to capture estimated expenses for travel, personnel costs, equipment, maintenance costs, commodities, and other costs that are associated with the development of a particular package. Use of this methodology has numerous obvious advantages. Number one, it allows time to develop a particular resource package ever before it's needed. And it defines the mission definition or a mission description of the particular package being described, therefore speeding up the requesting process, the time required to identify a needed resource, and locating a potential resource provider, and more importantly, cutting down the delays in putting together or costing out a particular resource. More importantly, it helps ensure that the mission resource requested matches or equals the resource being provided. And finally, a good mission-ready package facilitates both the Rec A and the reimbursement process. Now, let's look over for a moment at EMAC training and exercises. The advances, planning, and development of EMAC readiness capabilities at all levels by engaging in these practices, providing an effective means of evaluating the collective skills of resource providers and other involved EMAC stakeholders. Training and exercises ensures that a cadre of trained and competent individuals exist, is sustained and maintained, and are available to carry out the assigned EMAC mission whenever they are called upon to exercise that skill set, whether it be in-state or moved out of state under an EMAC mission request. And training and exercising also ensures that the EMAC process will work effectively in a real-world event. Okay, let's summarize some of the topics that we've briefly covered today. We know that EMAC is state law, and that law enables the sharing of resources among member states across jurisdictional boundaries and providing the legal umbrella that is necessary to protect, foremost, the personnel that are being deployed in a good faith effort to help out another member state. The 13 articles comprising the EMAC law also provides for workers' compensation, protection, tort liability and immunity, and licensure, certification, reciprocity. EMAC has an established history of animal response deployments beginning back in 2004 when multiple hurricanes struck the state of Florida. And as we've seen, many advances have been made in animal health resources for emergency response at both federal and state and local levels. Animal health resource providers can make resource support in future emergency events more effective, more efficient, and through the use of resource typing and creation of mission-ready packages well before the next big event occurs. Now, here are some recommendations that have been offered by states who have been working to develop animal health deployable resources. Here's one, for example, using NIMS model intrastate mutual aid legislation to establish enabling legislation, making veterinary services a function of the Medical Reserve Corps or another similar state entity to function under state authority. Doing this would clearly settle that publicly owned and operated or legal agents or cloaking legal agents issue that we've seen so many times and have questioned us so many times since 2004. Standardizing mission capabilities, ensuring that teams meet certifications and standards established for their particular disciplines in their response capabilities. And we have found in some of the discussions with different disciplines around the country that there is no standard for certification or no standard protocols in many disciplines that needs to be addressed and needs to be worked out. And only the discipline specifics can work those issues out through their National Association membership and through association with their federal counterparts. Provide clear definitions of veterinary terms. For example, animal handling and the degrees, registered veterinarian technician, certified veterinarian technician, and other types of nomenclature, using the insured word of standardizing nomenclature, which is an asset of using the incident command system. In reference job titles, as you saw back a moment ago in the NIMS, as a function of resource typing. Use FEMA's resource type definition and NIMS model mission-ready packaging to create your own mission-ready packages specific to your disciplines. And be sure to coordinate these activities with your state emergency management agency so that recognition of these emerging capabilities can be recognized, cataloged, databased, and utilized in time of need. Resolve the authority of licensure before an event. EMAC's Articles of Agreement include the principle of reciprocity, and every state has enacted EMAC as law. However, there are some state licensing boards deny blanket reciprocity for veterinary responders, for example. It's important to know when these issues, or if these issues do cause an impediment to progress being made within your state, that EMAC is state and federal law, and that licensing board protocols do not supersede that law. Well, this concludes our formal presentation on EMAC today. I want to thank you for listening, attending this webinar session. I hope the information that we have provided has answered most of your questions about animal health applications and EMAC. Now, Angela, we'll turn it back to you.
Thank you, everyone, for attending.